If you're looking for the percussion section in a symphony orchestra, you'll usually find it right up the very back. Compared with the rest of the orchestra, that percussion section can look like some kind of extremely busy workshop with a small group of musicians moving swiftly back and forth, reaching for a variety of different instruments throughout a piece, mostly to punctuate the music with exclamation marks. At some point around the middle of the 20th century though, the potential of that percussion ensemble really caught the attention of Western composers who were drawn to the endless possibilities offered by rhythmic interplay, as well as the inherent theatricality of those instruments. New works were written for percussion ensembles, and new ensembles outside the orchestras were formed to play them. Inevitably, musicians and composers also realised that almost anything that could be struck, shaken or banged could be a percussion instrument. Matthias Schack-Arnott is a remarkable percussionist and composer. His work is unique in the way he imagines and builds complex constructions that function as both instruments and sculptures. For Matthias, musical composition and physical construction are intertwined, and making a new work means moving backwards and forwards between the two until a piece finally emerges. For this new work, Tethering, Matthias has created his own percussion ensemble, a massed group of sounding objects that chatter in playful conversation with each other. The work's immersed in the materiality of sound and the physicality of percussion, but also it's magical.
The initial impulse for me was the idea of creating a work that existed almost like a rhizomic network of sound that extends into performance space.
Matthias has an amazing imagination. When he constructs a work, it's like he's creating a world. It's always larger than a piece of music or larger than a musical idea. It's always about constructing an environment and a kind of a landscape, a system, a weather system. He uses that word a lot. Yeah, it's never just a simple kind of one-dimensional piece of music. It's about taking us all to this another dimension, another place.
The way I develop ideas, it exists in a few different forms. One is sonic documentation, and another is through a lot of sketching of sculptural or visual ideas and imagining how they might have a sonic life. So in the case of this piece, which has been developed over 5 years, there were many, many months of me sketching ideas on paper, and the work taking on shifting iterations over that time and through those sketches that then finally make their way into a physical reality.
My background is in technical and production management and design. Matthias approached me and said, "We're finding this difficult. Are you happy to come and give us a hand?" So that's what I did, and together we resolved a number of the issues that he'd been having in how to stage it, how to present it, how it would work in a theatrical context. The most significant problem was he wanted these individual tethered lines to come from overhead, and yet we wanted to do it, or he wanted to do it, in a space that didn't necessarily have a grid or a way of suspending it. And they had been working with fairly large scaffolding pipe and clamps and so forth, and that was too heavy for the nature of this work. This is a light and ethereal, ephemeral work in many ways. I proposed to him that we create this prism shape. I mean, he had a prism context in his mind, but it had never been realised in this lightweight manner. And knowing the geometry and the maths of a structure like this, that I knew that it would work in this fine method, and so the equilateral nature of these two prisms was something that he appreciated and was intrigued by. So we did the design, we did a three-dimensional model of it, a digital model, which we worked through together, and we made a few little changes, and then we commissioned the construction of them, and here they are, and they're beautiful.
The way that I choose to engage with objects is looking at them primarily as sound objects, but also thinking about how they read on a symbolic level. So in the case of tethering, the way of approaching my sonic choices was around thinking about recycled, upcycled, or repurposed objects. And the reason being that I was interested in the way objects can have a second life and what that second life might be. A lot of the objects, even the more trashy objects like the recycled plastic bottles or the offcuts of baking trays or the styrofoam that used to be styrofoam cases, or on the organic side, the mussel shells or the seed pods, these are actually all vessels of different kinds. And for me, that was sort of one of the goals of the work, was to create a piece that was a container for things that sort of had a feeling of overflowing vessels.
I guess my main role in tethering has been to work on the computer programming and the robotic parts of the piece, of the instrument, really. Matthias and we've developed quite a way of working together. I understand how he needs to work and how he needs to express himself musically with it and what tools he needs to do that. I started off as a musician and making art and music that utilize computers, and I find more and more interest in the language of computer programming and seeing it as an art form as itself. And I also grew to understand that ultimately my fascination is with systems. It's with elegant systems, things that speak to one another and create a third outcome.
So as part of a creative process like this, there are a lot of technical hurdles that have to be overcome. My collaborator Nick Rue has created 7 quivering robots that translate sound into vibration that then activates 12 kinetic lines in the space.
So there's a lot of custom little computer programs that translate his playing into a physical effect out here. And so that's kind of my world, is making all those connections, like connecting the musical ideas to these kind of like electronic, physical manifestations. Creating something like this is very technically complex. Matthias comes with the original idea and you think, okay, well, I mean, sometimes you think, well, that's impossible, but we'll work it out. And other times you think, oh yeah, no, I can see how we'll do that. And so you achieve that, but then Matthias is like, well, can it do this? Or can it then do this? And you think, okay, well, we'll just modify this and change that and add this in, and now it can do that. And then, but before you finish that, Matthias has said, well, can it also do this? And so these layers of complexity just keep building until by the end, you end up with this kind of macrame of complexity. It never seems so complicated when you start out, it just always ends up that way.
We also have these 2 central spinning elements that have percussive strikers on them, speakers, lights. So there's a lot of technology in the piece, and one of the challenges of working with technology is that there's not the same degree of fluency from idea to execution as there is when you are using a humble percussive instrument. So at times that can be a very painful process, and they can behave in very unpredictable ways.
It's important when, and Matthias has spoken about this as well, so when you're dealing with technology and robotics and things like this, is that it's very easy for them to become these mechanical devices that efficiently go about their process and disregard this other kind of more musical understanding. And so I think having that shared kind of musical understanding, I can use that and in my approach to making things with Matthias, and especially on a project like this. And we can have that dialogue about, well, you know, what are we actually trying to achieve here musically? What does the machine actually have to do to make it musical, to make it organic, to make it not simply perform a function, but extend on the music that Matthias is playing?
So through working with the technology, what I discover is a new way of creating a sound environment. For all the difficulties in the creative process, there are an equal amount of gains in that you are, or I have been able to create something that for me feels very unique and unlike any other sort of musical environment I've found myself in. So that's really the payoff for doing something that hasn't been done before in this kind of way and is therefore very difficult, is that you find yourself, when it is working, suddenly in this fascinating and rich world that you can then have this rich dialogue with.
What's the piece about? It is about sound in space. It's about continuing his journey. He has a particular fascination with sound in space. So things that are located in various places on the stage or in the environment, and that move through that environment as the sound is being made. I think every bit of work that I've done with Matthias meets those criteria, and this is an extension of that, and it's an exploration of how objects such as, you know, what we've got surrounding us now can be as much musical instruments as they are a baking tray or a length of chain. I'm not sure whether it does have a meaning in the sense of, you know, what's it about? Oh, it's about, you know, 19th century Gothic architecture. I don't think there is that element. Maybe he will contradict me on that, but I think it's more about an exploration of what's possible. That's what it's about.